Hi guys, today we're going to talk about inverse relations and functions. So, first you're given this table and you have your x and y values, and these values have been plotted, the order pairs have been plotted and connected right here. Okay, so if we wanted to find the domain, remember the domain is the x values, and if you're looking at the x values, you want to look what is the first value that you use that starts on the left and what is the very last value on the right, because that would show us our x values, okay, because x value is horizontal. So the farthest to the left is this point right here. There's no other point past this to the left. And so if I mark it on my x-axis, it lines up right here. And the point that is farthest to the right is right here. And if I mark it on my x-axis, that's right there. So the values, because these points are connected, the values that you can use for x are all of these in between 0 and 8. So down here for domain, I'm going to write x is between 0 and 8. Now let's change colors here and we'll look at the y values. Well, the y values, the y-axis runs vertically, so up and down here. All right, and you want to look for the lowest y value ever used. So if I'm looking, the lowest point is this one and nothing else is below. So if I mark it on the y-axis, that's at 2. And then the highest value, this is highest. There are no other points in this graph that are higher than this point. So if I mark it on the y-axis, we're here. So I can use all of the values between 2 and 7 for my y. So I come down here and I'll say the y values are between 2 and 7. Okay, now this is for the blue graph, and as you'll notice over here, the blue graph still exists to just kind of show you what's going to happen. So let's look at this table. This table has 2, 0. And if we look at the point that corresponds to it from the original table, it was 0, 2. So notice those two just flipped. Okay? And then we had a 1, 4 on this one, and now it's 4, 1. We had a 2, 5, and now it's 5, 2. So you notice that the x and y flipped places. That's what's going to create the inverse of the original problem that was given. So let's look at the domain and the range of the inverse. Now the inverse is all in red here. I'm going to switch my colors. I'm going to do, I'm going to stick with red for right now. The domain here. The domain for the red graph. So if we look farthest to the left, because we're talking about the x-axis, left to right, this is the smallest value, or the farthest to the left. There's no other red point that's farthest to the left. So this one works. 2. All the way, if we follow it, there is no other point to the right past this point. And so we're here. So my x values are now between 2 and 7. And so our x values are between 2 and 7. That's an equal to here, so make sure you get that. All right, and they are equal to in all the cases that I've done so far, because there is actually a point at that value, okay? All right, so let's get the range. The range now is the lowest point to the highest point. Remember, we're looking, range is your y values, so we are looking, this is the lowest point on this red graph, okay? So we say, all right, well that's a 0 on the y-axis, and if we follow it all the way up, the top or the highest point corresponds with 8 over here. So our y values are in between 0 and 8. And notice when we when we took this table and we went to this table, we flipped the x and the y, and that did the exact same thing for the domain and range. So our domain of the original function is now the range of the new one. Our range from the original is now the domain. So it flips, just like the x and y values do. Something else that's important on this slide is we have this line here that anytime you graph a function and its inverse, they will reflect over this line y equals x. Now let's talk about y equals x. We know whatever we plug in for x, it will equal y. So they should be the same value. So if I say 1 for x, then y will equal 1. So it would be 1, 1. And if I put in a 2 for x, it would be 2, 2. If I plug in 3, it would be 3, 3, and so on. So anytime you graph a given function or relation, and then you graph its inverse, it will reflect over this line y equals x. All you have to do is flip the points, and the domain and range will also flip. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. It says graph the relation and connect the points, then graph the inverse, identify the domain and range, and graph them on the same grid. I am going to make this table, the given information, red. So I'm going to go graph all these points. So 1, 0, that's here. Then graph the inverse. Well, we just learned that to get the inverse, all we do is switch the x and the y values. Okay, so my new x's. So my new x's are all of the original y values, or you could just do them one at a time. So I'll have a 0 and then a 1. So 0 and then 1. Then I'll have a 1 and 3. 4, nope, sorry, 2, then 4. I almost didn't flip it. Okay, and so we're going to plot all of these. I'm going to do these in black. So I'm going to go 0, 1, 0 on x, up 1. All right. Now, if you'll notice that these two graphs, let me get a line here. These two graphs do reflect over the line y equals x. So notice how it looks flipping across the line y equals x. The only other thing that it says is identify the domain and range. We're going to identify them both. So I'm going to do them I'm going to color code them. The domain of the inverse graph, the inverse relation that we made. The domain, well, that's the set of x's, and since we were told to connect them, we have to say that everything in between those values is included. So my x values go from, in this black relation here, it goes from 0 from the left and all the way to 5 on the right. So the x values are between 0 and 5. Then the range for this inverse, the lowest to the highest, the lowest is 1 and the highest is 6. So the y values exist between 1 and 6. Now for the red, I'm going to write it over here. The red domain and range, well, the farthest to the left for the domain is 1, and it goes all the way to 6. So the x values here, the domain, the set of x values, are between 1 and 6. And the range values, the y values, remember the lowest to the highest, from 0 all the way up to 5. From 0 to 5. All right. So I'm going to stop here. We're going to try some practice problems, and then we'll move on to we'll do a second video.